Well, I'm glad you all came this evening because this is a really important time for us to think about community. And I hope we'll have a really enjoyable time because there's no greater pleasure for me than watching people come together and watching people realize they're part of the same community. So that's what I hope is available this evening. And I'm going to start by speaking, and then I hope that we're going to have some time to really have a conversation together about some of these ideas and what might be next for the greater Grand Rapids area. So I hope that next week's Time magazine cover doesn't look like this one, but it might, because these are the times we're living in. And but what I'm really in the question of right now is what are we willing to learn from Katrina or from the next disaster? And particularly as a community, what are you willing to learn that might have importance for Grand Rapids? What are you willing to learn from this? Not just to solidify your own opinions about what's going on, but so we could really look more deeply into our life, our community, our culture, our beliefs, all of these things. For me, Katrina is probably the second event after 9/11 that just parted the curtain. You know, you could see things that you couldn't see before. But how long that curtain stays parted is really up to us. And it may not stay open. The curtain may not stay open for the whole nation, but it could certainly stay open for Grand Rapids. And that's up to you, whether we're willing to really look deeply and learn and progress from this as a community. So that's my intention for tonight right now. Because as I've been out in the world working, I realize that we're faced with a terrible loss of faith in each other. And this is a quote from a very wise old Tibetan teacher who said, you know, whatever the external circumstances, what really makes it dark is when we lose faith in each other. And when we lose faith in each other, we no longer want to act courageously. We no longer want to come to an event. We no longer want to do anything because we've just lost faith in each other. And I've also realized that we are living in a time when the problems are so complex, but the way we go about solving them only increases the complexity of the problem. So I want to just briefly run through some of the ways in which we approach complex problems. And the first is that we go into denial. If you can see the outline, this is like a manta ray that I shot in Australia. These are all my own photos, so I bring you the world with them. The other thing we're obviously seeing is that when a problem presents itself, we move back into our positions and we compete. We don't think, we compete for who's right and who's wrong, who has the answer and who doesn't. And the minute a complex problem gets simplified into positions, we're really in trouble. I mean, I don't know if that's how you're reacting to what's going on right now, but this is very evident at the moment. And then this is also how we approach things. We just develop new rules, new regulations, so it won't happen again. Now, what we're watching on the news right now with Hurricane Rita is how much did we learn in the past month? Because we haven't had time to write new rules and regulations. The only thing that the government is doing is suspending rules and regulations, but possibly of the wrong kind, like minimum wage requirements and housing standards and such, to just scramble to reconstruct. But in general, whenever anything goes wrong, what do? We write a new policy. One of my colleagues who worked in a very risky business, the chemical industry, said that if you looked at the rules and regulations of his company, which was DuPont, he said, it's actually the history of our tragedies. You know, every time something went wrong in a plant, several new policies and procedures came out. So this doesn't work either, because until we understand the problem in all of its complexity, its root causes, we couldn't possibly know how to legislate. But this is how we handle everything. And then we're really good at scapegoating, right? What's been called the blame game here. It's just see who can get on television more often pointing the finger at somebody else. None of this leads to our capacity to solve problems. In fact, it just it brings back the curtain, and we can't really delve into all of the complexity of causes. You know, nothing is caused by one thing, right? It's everybody's right in some way. Everybody's right. When they point the finger at somebody else and somebody's pointing the finger back at them, they're both right. There's a lot of culpability, there's a lot of complexity that causes whatever the problem is in a community. So we really need to move past all of these dynamics, the blame, the denial, the just solving it with regulations. And we also need to move past this. You don't solve complex problems with expert advice. You need expert advice, but you can't rely on just the experts telling you what what to do and then coming in and doing it to you. We've seen enough of that, right? Now, there is a way, though, to solve these complex problems, and this is what's available to us. The first thing is we have to join together. We can't solve complex problems alone. No one person is smart enough. No one person is right. We're all right. And we have to widen the circle of who gets included in our discussions of the issues. Because no one person has the answer, we have to be constantly reaching out and including more and more people. And now you can see this on the news right now with New Orleans. Who's going to rebuild New Orleans? Who's going to have a say in the design? Who's going to determine the feel of the community? Is it just going to become Disneyland, which it would if the developers just came in and did it for tourists? So we need to constantly be widening the circle. The other thing that really helps with complex problems is that we as a community stay curious about our different perceptions. Instead of being certain that we're right and you're wrong, we stay curious about the possibility, as I just have said, what if we're all right? What if everybody has a piece of the answer right now? And could we stay open to that? And what's really difficult, I find it very stressful in this time in America, is that we're not only polarized, but when we occupy those different poles, our political beliefs, our religious beliefs, our traditions, when we operate in opposition to each other, everybody becomes more certain that they're right and the other group is wrong. I see this in myself. You know, I have less and less tolerance or patience or time because I'm only getting back certainty from the other side. So of course that just increases my certainty. If you don't see this in the political process, think about in your marriage, right? If somebody occupies a strong position, then if your spouse or partner occupies a strong position, then you get more adamant about your own position, right? This is just a very troubling dynamic because, of course, it doesn't lead anywhere. So the need is to be curious. Whether we can drop our certainty and actually be in a conversation where we're starting to listen to each other, I don't know. I think it's possible. I see it all the time. But another part of being in a conversation where curiosity is available is that we have to be willing to be disturbed. And what I mean by that is we have to be willing to let in disconfirming information. We have to be ready to let in opinions that we just think are too ridiculous to even contemplate. We have to allow our nice, stable frame of mind to be shaken up, possibly to even change our minds. I work with a group of nuns who are called the willing disturbers because we have taken on this task of just trying to think about how we could support each other. I'm not a nun, but how we could support each other as a community of women who believe that our work has sacred basis and that we have to be willing to be disturbed, but we have to be willing to disturb as well. This is a kind of competence that again has disappeared in the great polarization that's going on in this culture. And we have to notice in yourself, what do you do right now with disconfirming information? If it's something you don't want to hear because you knew if you let it in, it would require a change. Right? What do you do in those circumstances? You can start to watch yourself here. You can watch how curious or not you are. You can watch how you react when something disturbs you. Do you just shut it off? Do you move into it? Do you want to learn more? So everything I'm saying here that I'm putting at a higher scale about, well, this is going on in the country or this is going on in Grand Rapids, I would also like you to listen to this, to develop some questions about what's going on in you and how you're being affected by these times and what your own openness or not really is. Because I think this is how we're going to change. Now, the reason that I am so disturbed by our inability to come together is because of this fact of life that I have and my colleagues at the Berkana Institute have really discovered all over the world, that there is no power greater than a community discovering what it cares about. There is no power for change greater than all of you deciding that as a community you really care about something enough to work on it. And you know the Margaret Mead quote, which I hope you know. I hope it's on some of your refrigerators. It's a great truth. She said, never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever does. So this is not a trivial statement that's up here, because it's small groups of people who come together as community who are the only source of change ever. And the way that so many of us now depend on the federal government or the state government or the local government to create change, we are just wasting our time. And not only that, we're contributing to our own sense of powerlessness by waiting, by saying, well, it's up to them, whoever them is. It's up to my boss. It's up to the leadership of this organization. It's up to the government. There's a lot of looking upward when in fact that just contributes to our anger, contributes to our frustration, and nothing gets done. So my basic advice in all of this is we have to turn to each other because nobody else is going to bail us out of the mess we're in. Nobody. So one of the things I've discovered with community that by being in communities that are economically poor, materially poor, but rich in a kind of wisdom that I think we all need in this country. This is a picture of 4 women in Senegal, 4 gorgeous women. All the women in Senegal are gorgeous. And Senegal is a West African country. It's a third world country. It has great problems with employment, with literacy, with terrible pollution, the worst pollution I've ever been in my life. It makes you sick to be in the main streets of Dakar. Great poverty, all the dilemmas of a third world country. Yet in Senegal, there is no suicide. How is that possible? So we asked him when we were there, we said, how is this possible? Why don't you have suicide? And they said, we have each other. You know, I felt like the idiot. We have each other. Nobody goes hungry. Nobody is homeless. You will always have some place to go and something to eat. Always. What would it feel like? Because suicide is a great tragedy. Many of us have experienced it with friends and loved ones. It's a growing problem around the world. I've been in 4 nations which told me that they had the highest suicide rate in the world. So it's like this strange competition. They were Norway, Slovenia, Mexico, and I can't remember the 4th. I think it might have been Japan. It's a big problem, and here's a culture we could learn from. For me, it's a very simple lesson. When people feel they belong, they don't choose to leave. They don't get into that unbearable pain that leads to suicide. When you belong, you don't think of leaving. It's an incredible lesson, isn't it? Really is. So the power of community is something that I think we who grow up in this terribly competitive, individually focused, sort of social Darwinian society, it's something we really need to learn just in order to survive. And there's another lesson from South Africa. This is a group of Zulu children. And in South Africa, as in many traditional cultures actually, but in South Africa the word for what I'm going to describe is Ubuntu, U-B-U-N-T-U, just like it sounds, Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a short word with many, many ways of defining it. One definition is that a person is only a person through other people. Another definition is that I exist through you and you exist through we. And Archbishop Tutu recently wrote saying, we can be human only together, which I just think is a beautiful way to say it. We don't know who we are unless we're in relationship. That's a fundamental truth of the universe. It's all relationships. Even at the elementary particle level, at the quantum level, a particle is only a particle through other particles, literally. We can't see a particle until it collides with another particle and forms a temporary relationship. We don't know who we are until we're in relationship. And the reason I'm so focused on community right now is because these lessons come from our most materially poor communities who have learned that when times get tough, we need to rely on each other. And I've seen even in the corporate world that when times get uncertain and you don't know what the next future problem or calamity is going to be, when times are uncertain, the only thing we can rely on is our relationships. And certainly we've just seen this in the news with Katrina. It was individuals and neighbors saving neighbors. Small groups organizing to help other people. And always in those circumstances, the quotes that I hear all the time, listen for actually, are the people who say, we're not interested in saving ourselves. We're trying to save each other. And it's not courageous, it's just natural. Of course you want to help another human being. So we see this very clearly in our own disasters. I see it very clearly in communities which do not have material wealth. So that applies also to, in this country, in the African American community, in the Hispanic community. People know that they need to be together. You don't go through tough times alone. That's like bedrock, fundamental human knowledge. And here we sit thinking, oh no, we can do this on our own. No, we don't have to worry about the poor. No, we don't have to worry about issues of race. Nah, we don't have to worry about issues of economic disparity. We're just trying to make it, and we're so focused on ourselves. This is what is really going to destroy us. Because nothing living lives alone, period. That's a scientific statement I just made. That's a biological statement. Nothing living lives alone, except a few crazy Americans. With this great myth that we're individuals and you make it on your own. So we really need to get this knowledge into us quickly. And for me, one of the lessons that Katrina makes available to us is that if we don't have a strong social fabric where we really care for each other and we really know who's in our community and what their needs are, if we don't have that, when something happens in Grand Rapids is when you're going to notice that, oh, we need each other, but we don't even know each other. So this is for me. You have the luxury in Grand Rapids, I have the luxury where I live of actually getting prepared right now. And for me, the major preparation has to be the quality of our relationships and the inclusivity in our relationships. And you can take this message and think about it, but my own advice is there's no more time to think about it. Let's get serious here. What sort of natural disaster is Grand Rapids vulnerable to? Blizzards, ice storms, tornadoes, and floods. Well, that's enough to get ready, isn't it? Geez, you got 4 major weather incidents there. In Utah, where I live, it's earthquakes, but we don't have the other issues as much. So it's time to get serious. I mean, one of the quotes that I heard it was a comment by a scientist who said, after 9/11, the United States devoted all of its money and resources to homeland security, but only about terrorism, not about natural disasters. And the scientist said, so did the U.S. government think that Mother Nature was going to suspend her laws, just because we had to get focused on terrorists? So this nothing living lives alone for me is best illustrated by aspen trees. Do you have aspens here? Actually, aspens started here and they migrated west. And they migrated west during the last great glacial period, sort of setting the pioneering path that when the weather gets too bad in the Midwest, you head west or south or something, They wanted to escape the ice age. The way they traveled is the way they multiply. They sent out roots. Aspen trees don't propagate by seeds or flowers or cones. They send out roots. So what you're really looking at here is one tree. And I've been told that still to this day, farmers in Nebraska dig up aspens. So it's their own trail westward. But they're, for me, a very great, lovely example of what is expressed in most religions, right? That we're all connected. We're all one. Einstein said that the idea that we are separate is an optical delusion. And so at this level, you would say, well, there's a whole bunch of aspen trees. And if I had a picture of them underground, we'd remove that optical delusion and be able to see that, no, this is all one organism. So they're very, next time you see an aspen tree, just think of them as great teachers for our interconnectedness. Now, I'd like to talk a bit about what makes for a healthy community, because then I want to give you some principles for how you create healthy community. The first thing is that a healthy community knows that it's a community. It doesn't think of itself as a bedroom community. It actually wants to be together, have a shared identity. There is a Grand Rapids, or there is a Mississauga, or there is a whatever. People who live within that geographic area believe that they are together and they're connected around this shared identity. And a second characteristic of healthy communities is they focus on what's possible. They have learned something that I learned in 1987, and it really changed my work. I was reading a book by a friend, Marvin Weisbord, who's a great consultant, now retired. And in the book, Marvin wrote, I used to go into organizations and ask what's wrong and how can we fix it. Now, we've all been at those meetings, right? Right? Someone says, okay, let's list all the problems, then we'll prioritize them, and then we'll all get so depressed we don't want to do anything. That's basically what the sequence is, right? We'll just get overwhelmed by how terrible it is here. And we've known this for many, many years, about 50 years, that if you focus on what's wrong, even though you're trying to fix it, what you do is you de-energize people. That's not the question that brings out our best. The question that brings out our best, as Marvin then went on to describe it, he said, it's not what's wrong and how do we fix it. It's what's possible here and who cares. Anytime we focus on what's possible, we end up just with this great release of creative energy from people. Because, you know, we're very creative. We're incredibly creative. And when we focus on who cares, we get the people who are going to be committed to making the change. It's very hard, by the way, in this culture where we're so good at analyzing what's wrong, it's very hard to stay in the what's possible question. I've been with groups where I gave them, it was a university, I gave them the assignment to go off, to leave the main room and go off to the breakout rooms and to really focus on the question for their departments, what's possible. They had to walk maybe 30 feet across the hall. By the time they were in the breakout rooms, they were in the what's wrong. It's just how we're conditioned right now. But it doesn't lead us anywhere. And the question of what's possible is what inspires us to make a difference. Healthy communities also talk to themselves, not neurotically, but productively, right? They keep expanding who they invite into the conversation. One of the principles that I work with that's sort of taken from this is that if you're in a group, if you're in a work group, if you're in a church group, if you're in a family conversation even, and you're just going round and round and round and nothing is shifting, like you're just stuck, and you know what that feels like. The simplest way to shift that is to invite in new people. If you want to change the conversation you're in, change who is in that conversation with you. And it really opens things up. So healthy communities know this and rely on it. And finally, they have this very interesting concept about leadership. They expect leadership everywhere. There's some other research here that I just put out because I think it's pretty provocative. They've also found that healthy communities give birth to healthy leaders. It's not the leader that creates a healthy community. It's a healthy community that insists on a kind of leadership that is healthy. So if you are complaining about the leadership that you're getting in your organization, in your city, in your nation, We have to take some responsibility for this. Why do we put up with it? And this applies in any kind of organization where there is a leader. We have to take some responsibility for that. Finally, I think that healthy communities, like many of us, realize, as Archbishop Tutu said, that love makes many more demands on us than any law. We will do extraordinary things when we care. And when we don't care, we just we just retreat, we disengage. So it'd be really nice when there is so much compassion available on the earth right now, as we've seen with 9/11, we've seen with the tsunami, we've seen with Katrina, and we'll see with Rita. We will see compassion. And that compassion is making, not only opening our hearts, but making many more demands on us than if the government passed a regulation saying you will all contribute X amount of your income to the Red Cross, right? That wouldn't do it at all. But love is much more demanding. Now, this is the good news. Now I'd like to present the bad news and then return to the good news, okay? And the bad news is the kind of leadership we're getting today. The kind of leadership that is most prevalent, very dominant, and is hard to avoid. And it looks, in its benign form, it looks like this. Right? Where the expectation is that you have a visionary leader, he or she sets a bold vision, and everyone else just lines up placidly and follows along, and it all works well. That's the benign version, because the malevolent version of it, it looks like this. It's the Roman general. It's command and control. And what's interesting about this photograph is that this is a picture of a 16th century sculpture. And these objects down here, this is actually a leg, and this is the body of a slave on both sides. So even in the 1500s, this person made a strong political commentary in that sculpture. Great leaders are always great on the backs of the poor, of the enslaved, of those who tolerate their existence. Now, this style of leadership is so popular right now. It is what even good participative leaders have to react against. It's very hard not to be measured. It's very hard to be measured well if you are an engaging, participative leader, because the strong man image is held up as the standard. And in many, many corporations and many kinds of organizations, power, like as a big vacuum came along and just took power away from the lower ranks in the organization and moved it up to the top. And this was evident when I was watching Fox News interview Admiral Allen right after he came on board and took over from FEMA. And this is an interesting story because my experience when I was working with the U.S. Army was that I saw the most participative and the least command and control leadership anywhere. So, as they said, if you have to give an order to get something done, you have failed as a leader. But we don't see that. And then they have their bureaucratic side, which is pure command and control, But so the conversation with the Fox News interviewer was about what he was doing. And he was very eloquent, very smart, just listing all the things he was doing. At some point in the interview, the interviewer said, "So you're holding fewer meetings and giving more orders, right?" And he said, "No, not at all." He said, "Meetings are important. This is their community. They need to participate." And I thought, thank you. But just in that little interview, you could see the assumption that in this situation that was out of control, of course, you would just come in and strongman and forget about participation. That's the predominant assumption. So I've been wondering why this command and control has come back so strongly, and I just want to run through a few of what I think are the myths, the beliefs that lead to this kind of crazy return to control, looking for control. In my experience, when you try and control a chaotic situation, all without involving people, when you just try and control it from the top, what do you get? You get more chaos, right? So, but this is a big myth in our culture, that leaders actually know what they're doing. Right? A second myth, and I think this is the really prevalent one, that when you're in a high-risk situation, you have to control. You have to take back power. And I realized that sometimes I act this way, but it's not my experience. When I was in the Army, looking at what they were doing, when I was in a high-risk situation like this DuPont chemical plant, what made that work was that everybody was smart. And what I learned from that is that the higher the risk, the more we need intelligence of everybody. Because otherwise it goes up to the top and all you've got is some very beleaguered, anxious, confused, fearful leaders up there. They're not going to make good decisions. The decisions have to move out. And there has to be more intelligence available in everybody during a high-risk situation. And that's what the Admiral was talking about. This is also a myth, that the best way to organize is through putting everybody in a little box, telling them their job, and then thinking it's all going to work. The statement I hear over and over again from people in organizations and communities is, I make it work in spite of the organization, in spite of the rules, in spite of the policies. And we've certainly seen that with Katrina. I mean, there were some horrifying stories about people, certainly in the first few days, FEMA was just trying to figure out the rules, right? And apply them. I heard of one man who offered his boat to a government official, and the official said, well, you don't have the regulation number of life vests in the boat. And then this is really a bureaucratic horror story that was written up in either Time or Newsweek of how these different fire departments sent down people to help, and there were 1,200 of them. They got sent to Atlanta, and they got put in a room like this to receive training on affirmative action policies. And finally, some of the firemen just stood on the tables and started yelling, saying, we were sent down here to put out fires, to help people. What are we doing here? And the only thing the FEMA officials could say was, you're working, this is a quote, you're working for us now, you'll do what we tell you to do. They ended up, those 1,200 firemen, going home. So, you know, we see a lot here, and there's a lot to learn. Now, in a more benign example, how many of you have been in organizations when a new leader comes in, and what's the first thing they do? They redraw this, right? Like that's really going to make a difference. Now they redraw it and they fire people also. I think they do both things now. This is what organizations look like. This is what a community looks like. This is the real way everything looks in life. Always networks of interdependent relationships. This was drawn by a nun in Catholic healthcare organization. She called it a simplified example. And it is, right? It's far more complex than this. But this works through relationships. This works through good communication. This doesn't work through people throwing regulations at each other. And this myth is in all of us, I have to admit it. We still think that no matter what our experience is, if we give people the right set of directions or the right plan, they'll just go and do what we tell them to do, right? This isn't true in any of our experiences. Think about it, really. When you give somebody a plan, beautiful plan, well, this worked somewhere else, so we're just going to bring it right here. We're going to follow it. Look, they did all the thinking for us. All we have to do is implement it. What happens? How do any of us respond when we're given a set of directions? We all behave like teenagers, I think, you know? We change it, we ignore it, we take certain parts of it and ignore the rest of it, we shelve it, we file it. This is not how human nature works. And when I switch back to the optimistic side, you'll hear what does work. And this, of course, is really prevalent these days. I did just hear an author interviewed who's written a book about the use of fear in this society and how we're being controlled by fear. And what he said was that the area of the brain which is activated by fear is also the same area that is activated by love. Now, isn't that lovely? And this confirms the kind of research that came out of UCLA a few years ago with a group of women researchers who noticed that when things got tough in their department, the men would disappear into their offices, but the women would gather in the kitchen. So they started to look at the fight or flight research, and they found that almost all of the fight or flight research had been done on male subjects, as most of our research is done. And so they started doing their own research on how do women respond when we're afraid. How do we fight? Do we flee like the fight or flight research says? And they found that women have a different response to fear. Women, they said, tend, take care of, and befriend. That women seek out relationships, they want to protect the children, they take care of people while the men are off fighting. So we have a much greater repertoire, all of us, because sometimes women have to fight or flee, and sometimes men contend and befriend. But it's a much richer repertoire now of responses that we have available to us. Now, in the work that the Berkana Institute has done in the world, we've worked with this definition, as was said in the introduction, that a leader is anyone who wants to help. When you define leadership this way, you include millions of people. So it also leads to the realization that the world is filled with leaders. We do not have a lack of leaders. All of you have stepped forward at some point, maybe quite recently, because there was something that you saw that needed changing. It may have been the way your child was treated in school. It may be the way about something that happened at work. It may be something in the community. But we've all seen things that we know are not right, that need to be changed, and we have stepped forward. Therefore, we are all leaders. And this goes back to the fact that healthy communities know that they could expect this kind of leadership everywhere. But the other principle that I've worked with for quite a while is this one, that the solutions we need are already here. We don't have to go out and invent them. We have to go find them. And we will usually find them in unusual people. People we didn't know had already figured things out. This is true in a community where people are making things work, and we just don't see it because we're not looking at, we're not looking inside homes, we're not looking at inside poor communities, we're not looking. We think the answers are going to come from experts or panels or conferences or workshops or whatever. And so we're just not looking. One of the great stories that came out of 9/11 was with the firm of Cantor Fitzgerald, where they lost 70% of their employees, including one of their leaders, several of their leaders, but one of their presidents. And they were just decimated. I mean, they had nothing. And when they came back to work, first of all, they were given business by their competitors because their competitors really wanted them to succeed again. But they didn't have any phone numbers, they didn't have a database, they didn't have, their backup systems were probably in the offices. They had nothing until they discovered that their receptionist, who had worked there for many, many years, had the phone numbers in her head. And even she didn't know how many she knew. But for all those years, she suddenly became, the most important asset they had for a while. But the solutions, if you go looking, you can prove this. You find out that it's true. This is my image of the kind of leadership we need. It's by the same sculptor who did the general. But this is the earth goddess. This is Gaia. And I've been calling this life-affirming leadership because I want to focus on the fact that there's a quality and kind of leadership that actually brings us to life, that makes us feel by the conditions in the organization or the conditions in the community, makes us feel really creative. We suddenly rediscover our creativity. We rediscover the fact that it's good to be together. And even this phrase came to me from a friend who's a classical violinist, and he was trained in Germany. He's Slovenian. And he said that when he was training with this famous master German violinist, he would sit very close to the end of his violin. And as his teacher was playing, he said, I could literally see new life coming off the end of his violin. And I thought, that's a good measure for organizations. When you're in it, do you feel like you're in the presence of life? That there's just a quality among the people, a quality of vitality of, yes, we can do this, or this is great to be working together, that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking for. And of course, what's interesting about this image, in contrast to the general, is that this person is giving birth to other people, whereas the general was being supported on the backs of other people. And for me, that's really the difference. Can we find the kind of leadership in our communities and in our organizations that brings us to life, not the leader, but brings us to life, so that we contribute more. Now, I want to shift now, so I think I've already shifted with this beautiful woman, to really talk about the kinds of principles that I hope you will all take to heart. These are sort of rules for creating healthy community, but principles is a nicer word. The first one is that people only support what they create, period, full stop. People only support something if they have been involved in its creation. You can never parachute in the best idea, the best plan, the best thing that worked somewhere else. People have to be involved in it. And a corollary to this is that if people only support what they create, they only act responsibly for what they care about. This is something that we're pretending isn't true. We think that we can get people to work in our organizations right now by just bossing them around, rather than engaging them, rather than thinking that they need to care about the work. But there's been a lot of diverse research which has shown that if people don't feel cared for and don't care about the organizational purpose, then they will not contribute. They shut down, they become more robotic, they do what they're told, but they don't contribute. And in the increasing use of command and control, the only thing that's going up with it is workers who are, excuse my French, pissed off. So we have the highest level of worker disengagement in this country that we've had since we started tracking things like that, since we started caring about how people feel about their work. 75% of Americans are disengaged from their work. 20% of us are actively disengaged, which means we sue, we sabotage, we complain, we try and get others to complain with us. 55% of us are just disengaged. And when you ask what that means, it means, well, I don't get any recognition, I don't get any respect, I don't have any friends at work, I don't feel that my job is satisfying, I don't think that I'm learning, I don't think that I'm contributing what I know, and I don't think I have the means to contribute. I'm not given the resources. Those are the kinds of questions that are asked of people, and this is research done by the Gallup organization for people in all kinds of organizations at all levels, public, private. 55% of us who don't want to be there, basically. This is a huge problem. And in fact, I've started to notice that people are asking for a standard of treatment now by saying, well, I would just like to be treated like a human being. This is really sad. You know, really sad. But over and over again, I was just at this hotel in Florida with the willing disturbers, and as nuns, they're very sensitive to the staff who serve us, and they included the wait staff in the hotel in some of our events, and just generally had a good time with them, and the feedback they got was, thank you very much, you've treated us like human beings. And I hear this on the news even, that people are just saying, well, they're human beings. I think this was probably said with Katrina. They're human. Why do we have to remind each other of that? Why did that become the baseline measure? In part, I think it's because we are so separated from each other, and we actually start to believe that other people aren't like us, that they have different desires, different needs. They don't need what we need. They're not creative. They won't join in. They're basically trash. They're subhuman. And that's how we justify allowing such poverty, allowing such racism, allowing such classism. And this is where you see social Darwinism. There are some humans who are better than others. And the Darwinian notion is it's those who have succeeded. That's how life shows you who's good and who's bad. But this notion that just being treated humanely becomes a standard of excellence, I think this is something we really have to watch. Because we're in trouble here. So another principle here, certainly if you want people to care, it has to be something, if you want people to act responsibly, it has to be something we care about. And then we have to go back to this reality, that if this is what a community looks like, this is what an organization looks like, when you're thinking about how are you going to change this mess, this interconnected web, the best advice I ever received was from my colleague Myron Rogers, who said, well, you start anywhere and then you follow it wherever it takes you. You have to be willing, once you start a project, you start where there's need, you start where there's energy, but then you have to be willing to go next where it leads you. This is a very powerful way to think about change. You don't start at the top. You don't start with champions. You don't start with a strategic plan that you're going to roll out through the whole organization. Those are all fantasy ways to think about change. They don't work. But if you start where there is energy and great need, and learn as you go, and then move on to the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, the fact that it's all interconnected actually makes it possible to create very big change by starting small and then just following where the energy leads you. And you can apply this to your personal life as well. You don't have to change everything about you. Just change one thing. And once you do that successfully, then you'll find that you're feeling, okay, I can change the next thing, or I could do the next thing. And I've certainly seen this in some community work where this is relevant to your issue, because thinking of a community in California, a very economically poor community, in which they actually succeeded in getting a bank to stay. And after they got the bank to stay, they thought, well, what's next? What else can we do? And then they got influenced the schools, and then they got stores in the neighborhood that they wanted. But you just have to have that first experience, and then it shifts your sense of yourself and of your competence as a community. So you don't have to fix everything in Grand Rapids. You just have to do one thing or a few small things that you have energy for, that you care about. And then, because we all live like the aspen trees, interconnected, it spreads. And suddenly we're in a very different, changed community. Now, one of the processes we have to use is that we have to keep expanding the circle. We can't. The busier we get, the fewer people we want involved, basically, right? Like, I'm sorry, I can't deal with a committee of 10 or, well, certainly not going to get 15 people to all show up at the same time. So we keep thinking that we're going to get things done by narrowing the circle. And we don't realize that we're destroying our capacity there. We're not getting buy-in, we're not getting caring, we're not getting people involved in creating something. We end up just becoming the little group that got something done. What'd you get done? Well, we got a strategic plan done. Well, is anyone using it? Well, no, but we'll work on that later. The question that I work with a lot to keep expanding the circle is that I always try and keep asking, who else should be here? You know, when we're in a stuck conversation, as I said, who else should be here? Let's free up this conversation. If we've just had a meeting where we're talking about something, well, who else should be here? Who else has information about this particular topic? When you ask that question, you just gradually expand. And then the more you expand, the more possibilities, the more creativity you're inviting in. So I would urge us not to be afraid of larger group processes, because they really work to include and to expand the circle. And then another principle that's related to this is that it's so much more fun to realize that everybody is an expert about something. Instead of thinking that, well, you're dummy, or you're too poor to know, or you don't have the education I do, so you don't know anything, that we know best. Instead, to realize that everybody is an expert about their life, about their situation, about how to survive, and everybody, therefore, may have information like that secretary at Cantor Fitzgerald that is really useful to us. In fact, is more than useful, is necessary for us to really see what's important here. This is why communities, when they come together, when you get the whole of the community, all of its members, all ages, races, class together, then you have this wealth of expertise. Everybody sees a little different part of the community. Everybody can share their experience, and from that you develop a really wise group.
Something that just came into my mind. Normally we see CEOs coming in and they're given $300 million to straighten out a company, right? Now with the secretary that had all this information, what was the monetary wealth that she was given?
I have no idea, but it's a good question.
Because without her,
They wouldn't have, yes. I'm sure they did give her something, but I have a feeling it wasn't $300 million. What do you think? Yeah, or a bundt cake. Where'd that come from? Okay, I don't want to get into a lot of questions yet. So, will yours hold? Okay. It's just, we'll get better quality questions if I could just finish. Here's my new equation for organizational ineffectiveness. That the less thinking we do, the stupider we become. And I have to report that thinking is just disappearing, or already has disappeared. In most organizations, think about in your own work, how much time do you have to think? How much time do you have to think with colleagues? And how on earth can we learn and grow and adapt and change if we're not learning from our experience? We'll just keep doing the same things over and over and over again. So finding time to think together for me is the single most important thing we can do. And another very simple principle that really changes meetings is if we can stay in the discipline of listening for what's different coming from another mouth, rather than listening as we normally do for, well, who agrees with me? And then we label all those people as really smart, right? And everyone else becomes an enemy of some sort. Now, if you can just do this for fun, you'll see how interesting it is. You'll actually find that it's relaxing, that you're sitting in a meeting and you think, okay, for just once, I'm going to sit here rather than arguing in my head with everyone who speaks. I'm just going to listen fully, attentively to what they're saying that's different than what I think. And what happens is you relax, you have a better time, and something else happens that's really important. You move out of opposition and aggression. And it becomes possible to be in a reasonable conversation. And you might learn something. Because we may all be right now. Sorry. And finally, these qualities of forgiveness and patience with each other. You know, this is something I learned in South Africa. I've worked in South Africa for several years, and it's the place where I really saw forgiveness in action. I sat behind the parents of Amy Beale, who had been killed in a township the day before she was coming home. She'd been there working on black empowerment, black rights, and she was killed by a mob. And I sat in the hearing, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, when her killers were describing how they had killed her. Her parents were sitting right in front of me. They were sitting next to the mother of the killer. And they then dedicated their life to teaching nonviolence in the very township where their daughter was killed, in creating baseball teams, in economic development, in living in a way that would have made their daughter proud. That's how they described it. I always thought that was really interesting. But after seeing that, I thought, I don't know anything about forgiveness. And this is a really important thing for us to learn. And you could try this at home. Start anywhere, follow it everywhere. Now I want to just tell you very briefly, and then I will take questions. In the work of the Berkana Institute, we've been out in the world working with a lot of younger leaders for a few years, and these are leaders in very difficult places like Senegal and South Africa and Zimbabwe and India and Brazil and Mexico. And they have recently given themselves a new name, and they say that they are walkouts. And what they mean by that, the woman on the left is Marianne Canute. She's half Zimbabwean, half Danish. On her 30th birthday, she took a group of us back to Zimbabwe just to have fun. And while she was there, because she's a very successful young leader on the world scene at that time, one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. And she decided, while on her 30th birthday, that she was going to come back to Zimbabwe and do something useful. So she came back and built with her Zimbabwean friends a village from the ground up where people come to learn community development, sustainable agriculture, but they actually made the bricks themselves for all the round huts, the rondavels. And Marianne walked out of privilege, status, security. She walked out so she could walk on. And there is now an informal organization of walkouts. People who have walked away from a bad situation, who have walked out on comfort, have walked out from security, have walked away from abuse, have walked away from a job that was killing them. But they've done it so they could walk on. And the walk on is to walk on to have more contribution, to find a place where they could really feel they were making a difference. So this is a notion about walking out from a bad situation, a bad job, or just walking out of a confining idea or a belief, but not doing it to protest, doing it to walk on so that you can be of more service in the world. This is Marianne's 87-year-old Shona grandmother. I love this photo because of the generations and the difference in their lives, and yet they're still very much together. So I'd like to ask you, going with the what's possible and who cares question, for this community or the community that you live in, what do you truly care about? Is there some issue that's getting your attention? Is there something you worry about, something you think about, something that you keep noticing? Now, I would hope that we're all not noticing the same thing. We're all not disturbed by the same thing, because in that lovely complexity of that messy org chart, we're each positioned differently, we can each see something differently. And it's that multiplicity of things that are disturbing us that will make for a healthy community here. See, I learned a long time ago, my sense of it is that we each get an issue or a cause that comes along and taps us on the shoulder and says, you're mine, you're going to do my work, you're going to work for me. But the beauty of that sort of theology I have, that the issues choose us, is I realized that my issue will choose me and another issue will choose you, and therefore I don't have to do all the work, right? And I don't have to convert you to my issue. We each just have to work hard on the things that have gotten our attention. That's how you notice if it's your issue. It's something that is getting your attention. So what do you care about in this community? What's getting your attention? And then what are you willing to stick your neck out for? These are things to think about. These are just things to think about. But there will be an opportunity on November 12th that I want to tell you about. I'm going to be back here. It's a Saturday in November on the 12th. Some people have said, well, you can't do anything on a Saturday on the 12th because it's football season. And our response to them, this is being planned by the Delta group, our response, my response anyway, when I heard that was, that's what's wrong with America, right there, right? That we would choose football over community. But you may disagree and need to watch your team. However, the opportunity will be an all-day event that will be held
right here on GRCC's campus at the field house.
At the field house. And what we envision is a very rich, diverse collection of people who care, coming together in some very wonderful, energizing processes where you can discover who's in this community, what their expertise is, what they care about, and together actually have the opportunity to start some small things. We're not looking at changing all of Grand Rapids by creating a master plan. We are anticipating that there's a lot of caring and a lot of passion for very specific projects. And after we get a sense of who's in the collective, who's in the room, and really plumb all that rich diversity, which is always, I have to say, a highly energizing, enjoyable experience when you really understand that people you didn't even know were part of the community care as much about the community as you do. Or that people, I work with in a lot of large groups where we bring in teenagers, and we're going to do that here. And the teenagers, the adults are always so impressed that these strangely garbed, tattooed, pierced beings that are our children, that they have anything to say. They're always surprised at how articulate, how concerned, how smart these young people are. And the young people are astonished that the adults actually want to listen to them. I've done this a lot, and it's very, very rich. I have to say, a byproduct, when you have teenagers in a group of adults, one of the byproducts is that the adults behave better. It's really weird, you know. And the kids are behaving really well. You know, they don't swear or anything. They just pretend that they never swear in their lives. And the adults just really hold it together. So anyway, on November 12th, we're going to create the processes that will introduce you to each other and the vast diversity and expertise that exists in this community. And then we're going to spend the afternoon on seeing which of the things that have gotten our attention, which of the things we care about, are of interest to us personally to move forward. And this is a longer-term process that will begin on the 12th. And it's a longer-term process, for me at least, focused on developing Grand Rapids as a cohesive community that knows it has strong relationships, knows that it's a community, and can be prepared for whether it's that ice storm, that hurricane, your tornadoes, floods. What was the fourth one? Blizzards. Yeah, I don't think we should put blizzards in that category. They're relatively benign, aren't they, compared to the others? I don't know. I live in Utah, in snow country. Believe me, I won't be fazed. Martin Luther King said this, and I love it. He said, you know, our lives begin to end the day we remain silent about something we care about. I've always taken this as an individual statement. I would now like to raise it to a national level and say that if we stay silent about the things we care about, that America is over. We are at, in my perception, a true choice point that in the words of chaos science is known as a bifurcation point. It's when the world that has existed you realize is no longer the world you're in. And that you can't, and I'm just talking from a science perspective for any living being, that the environment has shifted so much that your identity now has to shift. You can't hold on to those old beliefs, to those old choices you made, those old ways of being. And at that bifurcation point, any organism has two choices. It can face the reality and reorganize itself so that it is more fit, more adaptive for the current environment it's in. Or it can refuse to do that, and then biologically that organism always dies, because you can't fight Mother Nature. There's a principle in ecological systems that Mother Nature always bats last. Okay? We are so arrogant right now to think that we're going to compete with Mother Nature. And so that's the reality that we're facing. We can't get through bad weather. We can't get through natural disasters, let alone terrorists, but just the natural disasters are enough right now. We can't get through them with our old identity, with our old ways of being, by pretending that we're community, but then seeing that we're not, by not even knowing who's in the community. So for me, this is an essential, critical moment for America. And so I'm in the question of what's at stake here. And for me, what's at stake is best illustrated in this image. The future is at stake. Really, truly. No fooling this time. The future is at stake. So I would hope that you'll show up on the November 12th because of what you care about, because you want to play a role in moving Grand Rapids into a much healthier community, into a community where you actually know who's here and know who needs what, and know that you have the capacity to actually create a community that you want to be proud of and that you never want to see on the news the way we've seen New Orleans. So that's what's available for you November 12th, and then moving on past that to really get something started. And before we go into questions, if any of you would like to volunteer to help this event happen on the 12th, then Carol Schwinn out there or Connie Bellows right here will just embrace you with open arms. Okay, so if you have any interest in that, we'd really welcome it.
And the other Delta deputy disturbers, please stand up. The design team.
See, they're all over. They're all over.
Join us, please.
Yeah. It's going to be a lot of fun. Recognizing community is always very fun. Okay, is your question still in you? Okay, please ask, Ron.
Thank you very much for sharing many of your observations and perspectives. I was particularly taken by the comment about bringing perspectives from new areas. And that's been my observation, that quite often any organization, be it nonprofit, profit, governmental, religious, has its own set of how it sees the world.
Right.
And when anybody else comes in from another area, there's a tendency to not trust them or not listen to them. And I've experienced that myself. Having spent 35 years in the business world and getting involved in nonprofit organizations, there's always this feeling that we're all, like the gentleman described behind me, we're all making $300 million. We all treat our people horribly. And I think that's a reflection of this intellectual arrogance that exists in too many organizations today. It obviously exists in our government leaders. I watched them on TV and I was so baffled, I guess, by federal leaders.
Right.
And I see it in some of our executives of large corporations.
see it in some of the mayors around the country, and I see it in some of the church leaders, I see it, and even some of the nonprofit organizations. And my question is, to me, that's a very small percentage of most the quality of most of those organizations, but we tend to emphasize the negative ones rather than talking about all the good things that all these organizations are doing. Is that a culture that's truly uniquely American these days? Do you see it in the other countries?
Which part of the culture? To not notice the good, or to
put the emphasis constantly on the finding out what's wrong and assuming that everybody is like that?
Well, I have a slightly different perspective. I actually think that at one level, it's the system that is truly the problem. It's the system, if you're in a nonprofit, of having to compete for scarce resources. Therefore, you have to kind of solidify how you're right and others don't do as good a job. And it's very competitive. It's the system that in public schooling, creates standards that actually don't lead to higher levels of education, but lead to higher dropout rates and teachers being overwhelmed and not being able to be full professionals. And in corporations, it's having to be constrained by a system of, say, quarterly profits, of having to look better than you can, that just takes good people and stresses them out, that's the minimal, or creates bad behavior. And we have these systems in place now, which I think are taking very good people and making it very hard for them to do good work. So that's my perspective. It's not even looking at individuals, it's looking at how does the system take us and just make us into people we don't respect, or people, very different kinds of leaders than we wanted to be. I also agree, though, that we're not at all in this question of what's possible and what's already going on that is extraordinarily hopeful and would be so beneficial for the rest of us to know. But I actually think we need to I work with a lot of people who are naive about what's wrong and are only focused on what's possible. And so they're not, in my own judgment, I call them naive or sort of innocent, because they think, well, everything's getting better. Well, no, it's not, because we've got these systems that really need to be changed at a fundamental level. I think we need to understand both. And we certainly need to understand that in the negative place, which is where I live, actually, just watching things that seem so horrible to me, but that if that looking at what's wrong takes us into fear, then it's only increasing the problem.
Can I follow up on that question?
Sure.
I think that another part of where he was asking is this unique to the U.S.?
Yeah.
Or is this an international? Are there other countries that are in the same boat we're in?
Well, no other country is as fiercely in the same boat of command and control, measurement, but they're all in it. They're just not as far along as we. We have had, with globalization, one of the consequences has been the total use of the American management model worldwide. And so we have enormous power, and people have accepted that model even if they know it's not, the most sustainable. So what I see globally is that other countries are behind us, both in the good things and the bad things. But now Europe is certainly taking the lead in environmental things, and has for years. Europe has always had the lead in worker rights and worker involvement. Other countries have had the lead in community participation, and I think in the practice of democracy. So, one of the interesting questions is, what are we the leader in now, and what have we fallen behind in? Because, as I see it, many other countries are stepping out much more courageously than we are about certain issues.
And what about the emerging superpowers like China and India?
Yeah, I fear them. I really do. Because they have not changed their approach to people. And so it's like very destructive values on top of, you know, competitiveness and the things that we're adding to it. I have great fear of what's going on there. Yes.
My question kind of follows, or comment, whatever it is, follows on what you had said about the being with the nuns, and that the people who were serving in
The staff.
whatever, were being, you know, treated like human beings, unlike what normally happens. And my perception, and one of the things I get very upset about, is the fact that we have a society that says that it's perfectly okay for us to have an underclass of people who are working hard, but they aren't entitled to a living wage. They aren't entitled to health care.
Right.
And they aren't entitled to a lot of the things that we assume or think that are part of things people ought to have. And then we condemn them for not behaving like we behave, or, you know,
Right.
have these things. And if they have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet and can't do all the things that they're supposed to be doing to be good parents or good this, that's or the other. And so I think that that's what I perceive about the system that says that this is okay, that we can do that, and we can pay the CEO
Right.
of some major corporation some $1 million to make a profit, and then do something like Walmart, who pays their folks such a low wage so that they can be eligible for Medicaid.
Yes. I hope you will bring your experience and perspectives to us on November 12th. I really do. Because this is a very complex cycle you've described. And it's very hard for some of us to see it. Yes.
How big a role do you think technology has played in insulating people or isolating them from
I think it's playing a huge role, a very destructive role right now. We think, oh, we're all connected and we have access to the internet, and isn't that wonderful? But if you really look at what's happening, it's creating this insularity where I only get information, I only associate online with people who are just like me. It's destroying our ability to communicate. You know, if you look at what emails do in organizations, you know, and now kids, you know, I'm actually studying the impact of technology on teen behavior right now. And, you know, they ask each other for dates now by texting, because then it's not so bad if she says no, you know. And the number of difficult conversations that are conducted online rather than face-to-face, even among young married people or roommates, is what I'm finding. It's quite extraordinarily destructive of knowing how to be in a face-to-face conversation. Now, a long time ago now, about 3 years ago, at Microsoft, they started to call face-to-face conversations face mail. So, but I think this is something we have to watch carefully. And I do know of a number of organizations which the leadership has just said, we're going to meet face-to-face. I mean, I was in one organization where people were actually in the same building, but they were attending the meeting by sitting in their offices, being on their computers. And the, you know, the thing is, if we don't know what we're losing here by being together, and we just become this transactional culture where we're typing in or watching each other on video cams, it's really something to notice. Yes. A little louder, please.
I just read an article about what this is doing to young children.
Young children.
They'll sit at a computer and look at trees but not walk outside, and they take recess, and that's very disturbing.
Yes, and leads to much higher ADD and other things, yeah. Yes.
One of the things you said that really caught me, I was listening to Bert Blakey today. He's the superintendent of Grand Public Schools, and he's talking about the fact that our inner city school is has something in the order of 80% or above of the students are below the poverty line, and that this is only going up in the next. By 2010, he estimates it might be 92%.
Wow.
And basically, the non-white, that represents the non-white percentage of that population as well. And when you talked about the fact that people don't feel like they belong, that seems extremely profound. I mean, that seems to be
Right.
we're just walking away, taking our money with us out of the system, and not at all feeling like there's any repercussions for that.
That's the point, that we don't think there are any repercussions, that we can actually get away with this. That's where we're in this large feedback loop right now, that you don't get away with this. You don't get away with such class disparity. In history, you never get away with it. It always leads to conflict and revolution. And yeah, that's, for me, that's the missing piece. We actually think we can get away with this. And it just doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. I'll come back to you in a moment. Yes?
I was wondering, the system that you were talking about, you stated creates this sense of powerlessness. It just increases and for marginalized groups, which may experience this feeling perhaps more than
Right.
some other groups. But what happens is that we are working in a situation like that now, and because so many of the residents of the neighborhoods that we're working in feel this powerlessness
Right.
that they don't have, it is very difficult to get them to join the groups that would give them
Right.
power.
But it does work to, when you're dealing with people who have good reason to feel powerless, that's where you, if you can start with one small thing, just what you're doing, you have to give people the experience that reverses their feeling of powerlessness. So you have to give them an experience where they're actually powerful. And then that does feed itself. But it takes time, and it can take, for severely oppressed people, what I've certainly found working in Africa is it can take 10 years to undo that. 10 years. But that's in the most severe cultures. Okay, yours is close to that.
Talking about all this, you've got to keep looking at the supply line. The supply line is
The young people, yes.
and learned that a long time ago in business that it's called quality system. You spend all your money on corrective action, which you tend to do. Government, medical, wait till you have
Just a little louder.
corrective action. Where we spend all money after the problem,
Right,
rather than prevention.
right.
And the prevention is with young people. And there are examples of programs, for example, one here in town called First Robotics, which is getting a lot of minorities, a lot of young women interested in science and engineering that they never ever
Right.
been exposed to. And now that's not a school program.
Right.
It's an example of an outside program, but it's having a powerful effect on them.
Yes.
And what I observed is the conventional solution to these problems, we go to these so-called experts, but they've been wrestling with them for 60 years and haven't solved it. So why would we assume that they're going to solve them in the future?
Yeah, well, that's where we're not learning from experience for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And this prevention rather than, corrective action. I mean, it would have cost at most $16 billion to rebuild the Outer Banks around New Orleans. And now 200 billion, 300 billion, unknown amounts to. So we're just, but this is where our arrogance shows itself. We actually believe that we can get away with this stuff. And so we're not actually even, I mean, I've been puzzling about this. It's like, since we don't think that it's really possible that something's going to go wrong, we don't feel the need for preventive action. Even when we have the data, like Head Start data. Head Start participation lowers teen pregnancy rates. But Head Start is under fire and is being, has lost its independence and is getting underfunded. And so even when you have the data about prevention, we're just not a culture that goes that way. And I think it's part of our hubris that, well, we'll figure it out, if it happens. It won't happen to us. But if it happens, we'll figure out how to solve it. It's just a very difficult thing to observe. Yes?
When we speak about our culture and how we come to be, we have built this country and our culture on just what you're talking about. To dismantle that idea seems almost overpoweringly threatening to a status or a group that's had this for so long. And so when we talk about thinking of others as subhuman and all of those things, this is what our country has been built on. The kinds of things that we allow to continue to happen comes from the fact that instant gratification does not make us look at what
Yeah.
will happen because we've done this certain thing. And right now, even though we know from our history, from all the things that have happened, that we have to answer for what we do, we feel right now the millions of dollars that would have cost to rebuild the levee in New Orleans took precedence to the fact that here's a community or people that are not worth rebuilding and using that kind of money.
Right. Now, we're going to have to close, and I don't know where you are emotionally right now, but I'm getting pretty depressed. But this is when it just requires, this is what I learned from Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, who, of course, awoke many people's compassion and service. She said that when she began her work by just wanting to help one person. She would find someone who was dying on the streets in Calcutta, and she just wanted that person to die in the presence of another human being. That's how she started. And so she said, I always saw only just one. If I'd seen the whole of all these millions of people, I would have been paralyzed. And so there's this place, this like razor's edge that we have to walk, which is actually understanding these larger dynamics that are at play. Really looking it in the face and getting a truthful view. That's the first thing, past denial. But then where we find our energy is working at home, working in our community, working for the things we care about, because it's just this one. It's just my kid's school. It's just Grand Rapids. It's just my block. And that when we then focus our awareness on the things that we do still have control over, that we really could change if we got together as a community, then we find something that I have found working especially in Africa, which is that when we come together, no matter the severity of the problem and the challenges we face, but when we're together, then we experience joy. And it's our, this is something that America has basically forgotten. That joy is available even when you don't have money, even when you don't have the resources. The joy is available when you're in community. And so that's how I'm finding my way through this, is to really focus on how can we come together, what do we care about, what do we want to see differently in this community. And yes, the rest of the world is going to hell right now. Yes, these systems are collapsing. Yes, we're in a lot of trouble and we don't have the money to pay for it. But in this community, there is so much good that you could do together. And that's just what we need to stay focused on. So I'm going to close by giving you a poem by Gary Snyder called For the Children, because I think he gives the same advice in much briefer form than I've just done for an hour and a half. But he described these times, although he wrote this in 1960, because artists always see the future first. And he said, this is how he was describing the times, but it's called For the Children. He said, the rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us. The steep climb of everything going up, up, as we all go down. In the next century, or the one beyond that, they say, our valleys and pastures, we can meet there in peace, if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children, stay together. Learn the flowers and go light. Stay together, learn the flowers, and go light. So I hope I'll see a lot of you on November 12th. Okay, thank you very much. And I'll be outside signing books or available to chat if you'd like.